And how would you handle paragraph 5C?
I would confide entirely in paragraph 5B, because that is...
How would you get round what's in 5C?
I would confide entirely in paragraph 5B, which is
Do you know what's
enough
in 5C?
for our purposes. No.
I thought you were a man of detail.
So if you don't know anything about TLDR News, we're an unbiased, independent news agency, and we talk about a lot of things happening both in the UK and in the US, including a lot of Brexit talk. So you might be surprised to see a video like this coming out from us. I can see the comments coming already. We're biased against Johnson, we're biased against Brexit, but honestly, we're not. We're just trying to let you know what's happening and debunk any misconceptions. So what do we mean when we say that Johnson doesn't understand no deal? Well, we're specifically referring to an interview that Johnson did with Andrew Neil in the last few days.
No, by the way. No.
No?
You will follow the questions I want to ask,
right.
not the ones you want to be asked.
With Johnson currently the front runner in the Conservative leadership race, and him likely to become Prime Minister in the coming days, they spent some time discussing Johnson's Brexit plans. That's something we've actually talked about before in another video, there's a link to that down below. But they particularly focus on his plan to exit the EU without a deal if the UK and EU can't come up with a better deal before the current deadline, on the 31st of October. Johnson's plan relies heavily on GATT Article 24. This little understood article is part of the World Trade Organization's General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, or GATT. GATT was drawn up years before the World Trade Organization, in 1948, when it was supposed to form the basis of the International Trade Organization, or ITO. When the ITO collapsed, GATT became the basis of the new WTO, formed on the 1st of January 1995. Today, the WTO regulations are composed of a whole load of different agreements, most of which have their own Article 24s, so calling this WTO Article 24 isn't strictly correct. Anyway, before we dive deeper into GATT Article 24 and get any more pedantic, let's take a look at what Johnson actually had to say when speaking with Andrew Neil last week.
Only recently you claimed that we could leave on no deal, and we just carry on trading with the EU as now, pending a new trade agreement to be done. You now know that's not true, don't you?
Well, it depends what sort of terms you strike with the EU. It might be possible, and I accept that this has to be done by mutual agreement, but it might be possible, for instance, as we come out, to agree under GATT 24 paragraph 5B that both sides agree to a standstill, a protraction of their existing zero tariff, zero quota arrangements until such time as we do a free trade deal. And that would be one way forward. And I think that would be very attractive.
What about,
and of course it would be up to our friends and partners to decide whether they went along with that.
You talk about Article 5B in
Paragraph
GATT 24.
Article 24, get the detail right.
5,
get the detail right, Andrew. It's Article 24, paragraph 5B.
And how would you handle paragraph 5C?
I would confide entirely in paragraph 5B, because that is...
How would you get round what's in 5C?
I would confide entirely in paragraph 5B, which is
Do you know what's
enough
in 5C?
for our purposes. No.
I thought you were a man of detail.
Well, you didn't know whether it was an article or a paragraph, but
that's enough for detail.
There's enough in paragraph 5B to get us
an agreement that we
5C
want. Says you don't just need the EU's approval, you need to agree with the EU the shape of a future trade agreement and a timetable to getting towards it.
If that discussion left you a bit confused, don't worry, you're clearly not the only one. So let's run through what GATT Article 24 is, what Boris Johnson means, and why he's been tripped up by Article 24, paragraph 5C. World Trade Organization rules state that if your country doesn't have a trade deal with another country, then you have to apply the same set of tariffs that you use with all other countries you don't have a trade deal with. In the event of a no-deal Brexit, the UK will obviously not have a deal in place with the EU. This means trade must be conducted using the same set of tariffs the UK applies to every other country. This means that if the UK and EU wanted to preserve smooth, tariff-free trade, every other country the UK doesn't have a trade deal with would also need to get tariff-free access. This obviously isn't a real option. There's no world in which the UK would grant tariff-free access to every other country they don't have a deal in place with. Some people in favour of a no-deal Brexit, such as Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage, argue that Article 24 does help the UK though. They say that the UK will be able to continue trading goods without tariffs or quotas for up to 10 years after a no-deal Brexit, without having to give other countries tariff-free access to the UK's market. It's this provision that Johnson was referring to, arguing that the UK can continue a preferential arrangement with the EU, even in the event of a no-deal. The extra time provided by Article 24 gives the UK and EU a chance to agree a new trade deal, which could come into effect once Article 24's provisions have expired. Just to qualify, this isn't some kind of Remainer attack on Nigel Farage or Jacob Rees-Mogg. They've just been seen as some of the most vocal proponents of this idea, and they seem to understand the article in the same way. In fact, for complete transparency, if you'd like to read the article yourself, you can head over to tldrnews.co.uk/Article 24, or click the link in the description. So let's dive into the actual document itself, and I promise this won't be as dull as it sounds. Let's start with paragraph 5, the section debated by Johnson and Neil. According to paragraph 5, GATT Article 24 is supposed to be used as an interim agreement for when two countries are sorting out the last bits of a free trade deal or customs union. Paragraph 5b is the section that Johnson is particularly keen on, and it does explain how Article 24 allows a customs union to be created between the two countries. Paragraph 5c is where things get a little trickier for Johnson. In the interview, he claimed that the UK could just use Article 5b.
How would you get round what's in 5c?
I would confide entirely in paragraph 5b, which is
Do you know what's
enough
in
for our
5C?
purposes. No.
But this is absolutely untrue. Unfortunately for Johnson, you can't pick and choose which paragraphs you choose to follow, let alone subsections. Paragraph 5c puts a limit on the temporary customs union to prevent them from continuing indefinitely. 5c states that referred to in subparagraphs A and B shall include a plan and schedule for the formation of such a customs union or of such a free trade area within a reasonable length of time. This means that before the temporary customs union could be granted, Johnson would first have to show a clear vision for the long-term trading relationship between the UK and EU, something which no one has at this stage. The real problem here though is that it's only an interim agreement, and the key word there is agreement. This means it would have to be agreed to by both the UK and EU. This should sound a bit weird to you. It would mean that the UK and EU would have to agree to the basis of a deal straight after a no-deal Brexit. Both the UK and EU would need to present their plan to the WTO, explaining why they were asking for this interim agreement, and what sort of arrangement they'd end up with. Again, this requires the UK and EU agreeing on the sort of future arrangement they want to have, essentially making a deal straight after a no-deal Brexit. If they couldn't agree to a deal within the more than 2 years since Article 50 was triggered, why would they all of a sudden be able to agree to a deal straight after the 31st of October? Even if they did, according to paragraph 7, any proposal is subject to recommendations from all 164 WTO members, and the UK and EU would have to agree to these recommendations if they want to enter into any interim agreement. This effectively gives all WTO members a veto over any agreement, which might explain why the article hasn't been triggered since the WTO's creation in 1995. It also doesn't solve the Irish border problem. There's a confusing provision with far too many negatives in paragraph 3, which states that the provisions of this agreement shall not be construed to prevent advantages accorded by any contracting party to the adjacent countries in order to facilitate frontier traffic. To be honest, I've read over that so many times, and I'm still not exactly sure what it's trying to say. But according to Laurent Bartels, a renowned expert in WTO law from the University of Cambridge, it doesn't help at all with the Irish border. And that's the biggest issue that Parliament has with Brexit at the moment. Ultimately, this is an embarrassing exchange for Johnson. He might have tried to pull it back by mocking Neil's understanding of the article.
So you talk about Article 5b in
Paragraph
GATT
5.
24.
Article 24. Get the
It's
detail
Article
right.
5,
Get the
yeah.
detail right, Andrew. It's
How-
Article 24, paragraph 5b.
And how would you handle paragraph 5c?
But Neil's response showed that despite a slip of the tongue, one of them clearly understood more about Article 24 than the other.
And it's
This
high time
This
we got on
bluster
with
may
it.
get you through the hustings. It doesn't work with me. I'm
Right.
trying to pin you
seem
down
very, very
on
choleric,
some facts.
Andrew, if I may say so.
In the end, though, it's hard to see that this will make any difference to the Tory leadership race, especially with Johnson so far ahead at this stage. Sure, Neil called him out on his knowledge of the details and his tactics, but it's unlikely to make any serious dent on Johnson. Time will tell whether Johnson will make it to number 10, but looking at the current polling data, it looks like it's almost certain. Of course, we'll keep you up to date with the latest on the Tory leadership race and Brexit more generally. To make sure you don't miss that, subscribe to TLDR on YouTube. Also, make sure to hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time we release a video. You can also find TLDR News across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News.